Hi, this is Frank, and welcome back to The Next Realignment. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Franklin Roosevelt's pivot from the progressive First New Deal to the populist Second New Deal, completing the creation of a new ideology, New Deal liberalism. By the middle of Franklin Roosevelt's first term, he was facing an insurgency from his own party. There was this growing movement that was spreading across America of angry populist Democrats. Many of them poor and working people who now looked at Roosevelt and what they saw was just another rich guy. He was another rich man in league with his rich friends who ran all the corporations, who had built this New Deal program that, as far as they were concerned, wasn't helping people like them. And the most important leader of this growing movement was Louisiana Senator Huey Long. Huey Long is one of the most fascinating, but at the same time, distressing figures to have ever emerged in American political history, because he was more than even just simply the political boss of Louisiana. He had become, over time, something closer to the populist dictator of an American state. He had risen through politics in the 1920s. He had become governor. And as governor, he had instituted a ruthlessly efficient political machine. He pushed out of office anybody who was not loyal to him, and he used his power to, through the state and also privately, to marginalize and destroy anybody who criticized him or who he perceived as a political enemy. And he would travel around the state, always flanked by armed state policemen as sort of a show of force. He was also a very outspoken populist. He hated corporations. He hated elites, particularly the elites that had long run the state of Louisiana. He hated the Standard Oil Company, which had a lot of influence in his state. And he was determined to use all this power that he had acquired to punish and take money from all these elites that he hated, from these rich people and corporations, and somehow send it back to the people, the ordinary working people of his state. And those people adored him for it. He took the money that he could from the government and he built an unprecedented public works program. He would build roads and hospitals and schools and do whatever he could to help the ordinary people of Louisiana. And they, in turn, supported him and adored him. And by 1932, he had now taken that populist campaign from Louisiana national. He was a Democrat like Franklin Roosevelt. He had supported Roosevelt in the New Deal. Now, a couple years in, he was harshly critical of Roosevelt and his plan. He was attacking Roosevelt as a rich guy at every chance that he got, and he had come up with his own alternative proposal. See, he had his own answer for the Great Depression. It was a plan that he called Share Our Wealth. And the idea of Share Our Wealth was, as he put it, to make every man a king. He was going to put a national cap on net worth and wealth, as well as a high wealth tax to enable to drain away personal fortunes. He was going to have an income tax that reached 100% for incomes over $1 million, tax all of it away. And he was going to take all this money and he was going to create a national minimum income. He was going to give free college tuition. He was going to create a national old age pension program. And he was going to try to bring the same populist program that he brought Louisiana to the United States. But he was not alone in this populist insurgency. There were other figures as well. There was, for example, Father Charles Coughlin, the radio priest, who had millions and millions of listeners across America who listened to all of his views on politics. And Coughlin, like Long, had started off as an FDR, a New Deal supporter, but by now he was critical too. And he was attacking Roosevelt on the radio. And he had his own proposal. See, he had actually started critiquing not just Roosevelt, but all of capitalism. He thought capitalism had proven itself to be a corrupt and broken regime, and he had his own program that he created, the National Union for Social Justice. And under his ideas, he was going to also have a minimum income, but he was also going to start nationalizing industries or having industries put under public control for the public benefit. Then there was another figure that had emerged around this time. There was a humble medical doctor from California by the name of Francis Townsend. Now, Dr. Townsend, He just an ordinary guy in California, and he's looking around, he's getting upset. He sees elderly people who are now destitute, they don't have any savings, they've been wiped out by the Depression, and they can't work because they're too old, and they're going hungry, and they're desperate. So he wanted a solution to that, and he came up with one. He came up with this plan. He called it the Townsend Plan for an old age pension system in the United States. And as it happened, his plan got really, really popular. It started to get press. It spread across the country. And Dr. Townsend went from an ordinary little minor doctor to a national celebrity. Initially, he expected that Franklin Roosevelt would also support his program. But Roosevelt didn't. He thought it was a pie-in-the-sky idea. It was going to cost too much money. So after time, Townsend starts getting moved and pushed into this other movement of unhappy Democrats. He's attacking Roosevelt too, and this growing popularity of this Townsend Plan is being taken as a critique of Franklin Roosevelt. So Roosevelt and his New Dealers now, they're facing a crisis because as this movement is growing, America is moving towards the 1936 election. And Roosevelt suspects that Huey Long is intending to run for president against him. He's going to challenge him for the presidency, and beyond that, he's concerned that Long very well might win. And that worries him for a couple of reasons. One, just for his own political fate, all the New Dealers are going to be out of office and the New Deal is going to be done. But more than that, they're really worried about Long just as a political figure, given the role he's played in the state of Louisiana. They're concerned about giving a guy like that the power of the presidency and what he would do and what it could actually do to the republic itself. They have to do something to head off this insurgency. So what they do is they pivot. See, the first New Deal had been this progressive program that was meant to manage the economy and coordinate efforts across the nation to try to make the economy work better. But now they were going to come up with their own populist program to head off the attacks of people like Long and Coughlin and Townsend. They were now going to launch a second New Deal of populist programs. They came up with new ideas like there's a work progress administration. They were going to come up with a program that was going to take millions of Americans and put them directly back to work, working for the federal government. They also came up with ideas like an old age pension plan of their own, one modeled on the Townsend Plan, although less generous than the one that Townsend had proposed. They also came up with an idea that they were going to force corporations to pay out dividends because there was a lot of complaints that their New Deal had been trying to raise prices and companies were raising the prices, but they weren't using the money to put people back to work. They were just keeping it. They also started coming up with some tax programs. They came up with a tax bill, a bill that had really hiked up taxes for the wealthy, particularly with a top rate of 79%, a rate that was designed to target one and only one man in America, John Rockefeller. This second New Deal of populist ideas, it worked. It turned out, after all, that Huey Long didn't even get to challenge Franklin Roosevelt for the presidency because he was assassinated before the election. And his supporters, along those with Coughlin and Townsend, well, they tried to put together a third-party effort, and it never really got off the ground. So Franklin Roosevelt sailed to renomination and re-election in 1936. But he now presided over what was now a very different Democratic Party. It was a Democratic Party that had merged together two ideas that used to be separate. It had united the ideas of the first New Deal, these ideas of progressivism, that we could use expertise and planning in order to plan a society that created progress. And it united them to these ideas of populism, that it was the job of the government to do things that benefited working people and the people who were the least well off. And had merged these two ideas into now one united philosophy, this idea of New Deal liberalism, that we should use policy and planning of progressivism to benefit working people and the least well off of populism. And as Franklin Roosevelt continued through the rest of his administration, this philosophy that had emerged out of these early fights over the New Deal continued to motivate his administration until they settled into just the philosophy of the Democratic Party. And when Franklin Roosevelt eventually passed from the scene and new people took over the Democratic Party, it had now just become the Democratic Party ideology where it continued to rule for decades and decades all the way up until today. And this philosophy, It now offered a different answer, an answer to the great debate that had emerged out of the Great Depression and the ideas of modernity and the new complex society. It said that, yeah, America has become more complex, but it doesn't mean we need to scrap the republic overall. We don't need to ditch it for a new system of government that's more modern. What we need to do instead is take the core of the republic and graft onto it new powers, new institutions, new abilities to act. And that through those, this is how these progressive policy planners are going to plan progress with these new powers that we're going to give them with these new institutions. And they'll use it for the benefit of working people and the least well off, and thereby the American Republic will have the ability to navigate the new modern economy and the new, more complex society that had emerged. The New Deal was broadly popular, but of course, it wasn't popular with everybody, and not all of it was popular with everybody. There were certain programs that people didn't like. There were certain ideas that people thought were maybe taken too far. Some people didn't agree with the ideology behind the New Deal programs. Some people didn't like the specific implementation of the New Deal. Or some people just thought that there needs to be limits, that maybe these new powers, the government needed to have them, but they didn't need to be unlimited. They didn't need to go that far. Naturally, they started to make alliances. They were fellow travelers. They had agreements on this big issue about the New Deal, so they started to work together. And as they worked together over time, they found themselves pulled into the husk of what was left of the Republican Party that had been left behind by Herbert Hoover. And as the new political vehicle of the opposition, the Republican Party started building this new coalition of people who opposed the New Deal for various reasons, and all those reasons started to coalesce into an ideology itself. An ideology that had coherent ideas behind what the problem with the New Deal was or where the limits on the New Deal ought to be. And that ideology that started to emerge, it took on a name. Modern conservatism, or simply conservatism. And the story about how that all came to be, well, that's what we'll be talking about next. Thanks a lot for watching, and make sure you tune into the next episode because we're going to be talking about how reaction against the New Deal created another new political philosophy, modern conservatism.